Close your eyes and let the world fall away. Tonight, we journey to the Frostspire Mountains, a place where the winds carry ancient whispers and the stars dance like flames in the cold northern skies. Breathe deeply and let the sound of my voice guide you into a story of courage, wonder, and the light of the Aurora Core. Let go of the day's worries and drift into a realm of dreams where snow-covered peaks hold secrets and every shadow tells a tale. Are you ready? Then let us begin. The Frostspire Mountains stood like a frozen crown at the edge of the world, their jagged peaks piercing the low-hanging clouds. Whispers of the Aurora Core, the fabled jewel guarded by the Frost Dragon, had drawn dreamers, warriors, and fools for generations. Few ever returned, and those who did spoke of a cold so fierce it froze courage in the hearts of the boldest adventurers. Some claim to have seen Borealis, its cold fire spiraling through the skies, the dragon's breath as dazzling as the northern lights and just as unforgiving. Eira had heard the stories as a child. Her village, nestled in the shadow of the Frostspire, shared the tales during long winter nights when the wind howled like a beast. The jewel was said to grant unparalleled bravery to anyone who held it, a gift not only of valor but clarity, the courage to face any challenge and the wisdom to wield it justly. Yet the tales were always tinged with caution. The dragon was not a simple guardian. It was a judge, sifting through the desires of those who came seeking the jewel and finding all but the purest unworthy. As she grew older, the stories faded into the background of life's struggles. Yet, the whispers of the Aurora Core never truly left her. They lingered in the moments of doubt. In the nights, she stared at the distant peaks, wondering what it would feel like to hold courage in her hands. Now, as she tightened her frost-resistant cloak against the bitter wind, she stood on the threshold of the unknown, her breath misting in the icy air. She had decided to find out. The journey to the Frostspire was no easy task. The first steps took her through her village's outskirts, where she passed neighbors bundled in furs, their faces lined with doubt and fear. "You'll never return," one muttered, clutching his staff as though to ward off the shadow of Borealis itself. Others turned away, unwilling to meet her gaze. To them, she was already lost, another name to add to the long roll of those who had vanished into the mountains. But Eira carried something more than ambition. She carried a quiet resolve born from years of hardship. Her parents had been wanderers, travelers who had sought fortune far from the Frostspire but had never returned. She had grown up on the edge of adventure, surrounded by stories but never a part of them. The Aurora Core was not just a jewel to her. It was a chance to prove that fear did not have to be the master of her fate. The air grew colder as she ascended the mountain trails, the wind sharper, biting through layers of wool and leather. Snow swirled around her in ghostly patterns, obscuring the path ahead. Yet she pressed on, her steps steady, her eyes fixed on the peaks that loomed like ancient sentinels. At dusk, she found shelter beneath a rocky overhang, lighting a small fire with trembling fingers. The flames cast flickering shadows against the rock, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the journey. The wind howled outside, a haunting sound that seemed to carry voices, a cacophony of warnings and whispers. She ignored them, staring into the flames until sleep took her. In her dreams, the mountain spoke, not in words, but in sensations, flashes of icy caverns, the glint of light on crystalline scales, and the endless weight of the dragon's gaze. When she awoke, her breath caught in her throat. The shadows of the overhang had shifted, and perched just beyond the firelight was a raven, its feathers as black as the void between stars. "Traveler," it croaked, its voice rasping like ice scraping stone. "Do you seek the jewel?" Eira sat up, her heart pounding. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the eerie presence of the bird. The raven tilted its head, its beady eyes reflecting the firelight like twin embers. "Then you must understand. The jewel does not grant courage, it reveals it. Those who seek it for power will find only their end. Are you ready to face yourself?" Eira hesitated, the weight of the raven's words settling over her like the snow outside. But her resolve held firm. "I am ready." The raven let out a low, hollow caw before spreading its wings and vanishing into the night, leaving only the echo of its warning behind. As the fire crackled and the wind howled, Eira knew there would be no turning back. The Frostspire had acknowledged her presence, and her journey into its heart had begun. The mountain loomed larger with every step, its slopes shrouded in a veil of shifting snow and mist. Eira tightened her cloak against the piercing cold, her boots crunching through ice crusted over deep drifts. The path was little more than a suggestion now, a faint impression on the landscape erased and rewritten by each passing storm. Yet something guided her, whether it was instinct or the raven's cryptic warning she couldn't say. The first trial came as the light faded. Twilight stained the world in shades of blue and grey, the silence broken only by the occasional groan of shifting ice. She arrived at a frozen lake, its surface glassy and black, reflecting the jagged peaks around it. The air here felt heavier, charged with an unnatural stillness. Her breath fogged in the cold, but the mist lingered too long, curling like tendrils around her face. A faint shimmer pulsed beneath the lake's surface. It was not the playful glint of sunlight on ice, but a cold, unyielding light, like the frozen glow of the Aurora Core itself. Her path led across the lake, but as she stepped forward, the ice groaned beneath her boots, sending ripples through the glow below. She stopped, her pulse quickening. Suddenly, A shadow flickered beneath the surface, darting too quickly to follow. Then another, larger this time. Shapes swam beneath the ice. Dark, sinuous forms that coiled and twisted like smoke in water. She crouched to peer closer, only for one to slam against the underside of the ice with a deafening crack. Eira stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. The raven's voice echoed in her mind. "Are you ready to face yourself?" She inhaled deeply, forcing calm into her shaking hands. The creatures below the ice weren't real, she told herself. They couldn't be. And yet, as she stepped forward again, they surged, slamming against the ice with renewed fury, their glowing eyes following her every move. Each step was a test of will, each groan of the ice a reminder of how easily it could shatter beneath her. But she pressed on, her resolve outweighing her fear. When she reached the other side, the lake fell silent, and the glow beneath the ice faded into darkness. Eira glanced back only once. The lake lay still and black, as though the trial had never existed. The second trial came as the moon rose high, casting its pale light through the swirling snow. The air grew colder still, each breath burning her lungs. She climbed higher, the path narrowing to a treacherous ledge that hugged the mountain's sheer face. The wind howled here, tearing at her cloak and threatening to send her plummeting into the abyss below. It was then that she heard it. A low, guttural growl, barely audible above the wind. She froze, her hand instinctively going to the knife at her belt. The growl came again, closer this time, and she turned to see a pair of eyes gleaming in the shadows ahead. The creature emerged from the darkness, its form shifting as it moved. At first it resembled a wolf, its fur bristling with frost. But as it stepped closer, its limbs stretched unnaturally, its body twisting into something monstrous and undefined. Its eyes bore into hers, unblinking, as though it saw straight through her. Eira stood her ground, gripping her knife tightly. The creature circled her, its movements slow and deliberate, as if testing her. She could feel the weight of its gaze, the cold seeping into her very bones. It wasn't a beast of flesh and blood, she realized. It was something older, something born of the mountain itself. "Why have you come?" it growled, its voice a low rumble that resonated through the air. "I seek the Aurora Core," she replied, her voice steady despite the chill that gripped her. The creature stopped, its head tilting. "Do you think yourself worthy?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I will face whatever I must to find out." The creature regarded her for a moment longer before letting out a guttural snarl. It lunged, its form dissolving into a swirl of shadows that enveloped her. The cold was suffocating, the darkness pressing against her from all sides. Memories and doubts flooded her mind, visions of every failure, every fear she had ever known. But she refused to succumb. Planting her feet, she drew on the same resolve that had carried her across the lake. The shadows recoiled, their grip loosening as her courage burned through the doubt. With a final cry, she pushed them away, and the creature vanished into the snow. The ledge was silent once more, the wind carrying away all trace of the encounter. Eira exhaled shakily, her breath misting in the air. The path ahead was clear, but she knew the trials were far from over. The mountain had tested her courage and her resolve, and it would test her again. But she was ready. With the moonlight guiding her steps, she pressed on into the heart of the Frostspire. Eira reached the summit of the Frostspire, just as the first light of dawn painted the world in a ghostly silver. The air was so cold that even the act of breathing felt like swallowing shards of glass. The mountain's peak pierced the heavens, wrapped in veils of mist and snow. At its heart, hidden behind jagged ice formations, was the entrance to the dragon's lair, a cavern carved by time and fire, its opening framed by jagged icicles that hung like the teeth of some enormous beast. She stood at the threshold, her boots crunching on the frost-covered stones, and for a moment she hesitated. The tales she had heard as a child flooded back to her, warnings about Borealis and the countless souls who had never returned from this place. But she had come too far to falter now. Adjusting her cloak, she stepped into the darkness. The air inside the cavern was heavy, vibrating with an unnatural energy that made her skin prickle. Light filtered through cracks in the icy walls, refracting into beams that painted the space in shifting hues of blue and green. The ground beneath her boots was polished smooth, like glass, and every step echoed endlessly in the vast chamber. The deeper she went, the more the air seemed to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through her chest. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw it, the Aurora Core. The jewel floated in the center of the cavern, suspended in a column of shimmering light. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, its surface alive with shifting colors that pulsed like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Its light was both mesmerizing and unsettling, as though it held the weight of countless untold stories. But the jewel was not unguarded. From the shadows emerged Borealis, the frost dragon. Its body glimmered like frost-coated glass, each scale catching the light and refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors. Its wings stretched wide, their edges sharp as blades, and its eyes glowed with an icy fire that seemed to pierce straight through Eira. The dragon's breath misted in the air, each exhale a gust of freezing wind that threatened to extinguish her courage. Borealis circled her slowly, its massive claws clicking against the frozen ground. "Another seeker!" it rumbled, its voice deep and resonant, echoing through the cavern like thunder. "Do you know how many have come before you, little wanderer?" Eira's throat felt dry, but she forced herself to speak. I've heard the stories. I know the risks. The dragon's eyes narrowed, and it lowered its head until it was level with her own. Then you know that bravery alone will not save you. The Aurora Core is no mere trinket to be claimed. It reveals the truth of the one who seeks it. Can you face that truth, mortal? Eira stood her ground, her heart hammering in her chest. I can! Borealis let out a low growl, a sound that reverberated through the cavern and sent shards of ice falling from the ceiling. We shall see. The dragon inhaled deeply, and then it unleashed its cold fire, a swirling torrent of white and blue flames that froze the air itself. Eira threw up her arms, bracing for the impact, but the flames did not burn. Instead, they enveloped her, filling the air with an intense cold that seeped into her very bones. For a moment, she felt as though she might shatter, but she didn't. As the flames subsided, she realized she was still standing. Borealis watched her, its expression unreadable. You endure, it said, its tone almost contemplative. But endurance is not the same as courage. The final trial awaits. The dragon stepped aside, revealing the Aurora Core in all its brilliance. Its light seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, drawing her forward. Take it, Borealis commanded. But know this, the core does not grant bravery. It reveals it. You will see yourself as you truly are. If you cannot bear the weight of that truth, you will not leave this place. Eira hesitated, her breath catching in her throat. The core's light was beautiful, but there was something unnerving about it, as though it could see into the deepest corners of her soul. But she had not come this far to turn back now. Steeling herself, she reached out and wrapped her fingers around the jewel. It was cold to the touch, its surface smooth and unyielding. As she lifted it from its pedestal, the cavern fell silent. The light of the Aurora Core enveloped her, and the world dissolved into a blinding, otherworldly glow. The moment Eira grasped the Aurora Core, the world fell away. She was no longer in the cavern of ice, no longer standing beneath the unyielding gaze of Borealis. Instead, she was surrounded by light, cold, pulsating, and alive. It pressed against her from all sides, whispering in a language she did not understand. The voices seemed to beckon her deeper into the light, promising truths and revelations. She took a tentative step forward, but the ground was gone. She was suspended in a void of swirling colors, a place that felt both infinite and suffocating. Her reflection appeared before her, hovering in the light. At first, it was just a mirror image, but then it began to change. Her reflection frowned, its eyes narrowing. "Why are you here, Eira?" it asked, its voice sharp and accusing. "What makes you think you deserve the jewel?" Eira faltered, the weight of the question pressing down on her. "I seek courage," she replied. "I want to prove that I am not ruled by fear." The reflection laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Courage. You seek it as if it is something you can possess, something separate from who you are. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is what you do despite it. The reflection's features twisted, its face becoming unfamiliar, monstrous. Can you face the truth of what you fear most? Before Eira could answer, the light shifted. The void transformed, taking shape and color. She was standing in her childhood home, the walls familiar but distorted. The air felt heavy, suffused with an eerie stillness. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, growing darker and larger until they took the shape of her parents. They stood before her, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes accusing. "You let us go," her mother said, her voice cold and distant. "You were too afraid to follow us, too weak to find us." Eira shook her head, her heart pounding. "I was a child. There was nothing I could do." Her father stepped forward, his shadow towering over her. "And now, you claim to seek bravery, but you still run from your fears. You seek the jewel to make yourself feel whole, but what will you do when it shows you your failure?" Eira's throat tightened. The words cut deep, dredging up memories she had tried to bury. The countless nights she had stared at the Frostspire, too afraid to take the first step. The years of self-doubt, of wondering if her parents had left because they had seen something in her, something lacking. The shadows loomed closer, their voices growing louder, overlapping in a cacophony of accusations. She felt herself shrinking beneath their weight, her resolve faltering. The Aurora Core in her hand grew colder, its light dimming. The voices echoed in her mind. "You are not enough. You will never be enough." But then, somewhere deep within her, a spark ignited. She clenched the jewel tightly, its cold bite grounding her. She had faced these fears before, lived with them in the quiet moments of doubt. She had carried them up the mountain, through the trials of ice and shadow. But she had also carried something else, an unyielding determination. "I may be afraid," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I may have failed before, but fear doesn't define me, and neither do you." The shadows froze, their forms wavering. The light of the Aurora Core began to grow, its glow spreading outward, washing over the darkness. The shadows dissolved, their whispers fading into silence. Eira stood alone in the void, the jewel in her hand blazing with light. The cavern returned, the icy walls shimmering as though alive with the same light that now surrounded her. Borealis watched her from the shadows, its crystalline eyes gleaming with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "You face the truth," the dragon said, its voice low and resonant. "Few have the strength to do so. You see now that courage is not something the Aurora Core can grant. It is something that has always been within you." Eira nodded, her grip on the jewel steady. She felt the truth of the dragon's words in her bones. The trials, the doubts, even the fear. They had been her teachers, shaping her into someone who could hold the jewel not as a trophy, but as a reflection of her own resilience. Borealis stepped closer, its massive frame casting long shadows across the cavern. You have earned the Aurora Core, Eira. But remember, its power is a burden as much as it is a gift. Use it wisely. With those words, the dragon turned and disappeared into the darkness, its form dissolving like mist. The cavern grew still, the light of the Aurora Core illuminating the path ahead. Eira took a deep breath, the weight of the jewel heavy in her hands, but light in her heart. She had passed the test, but her journey was far from over. The Aurora Core rested in Eira's hands, its radiant glow softening to a steady, calming pulse. The cavern felt transformed. No longer an imposing fortress of ice, it seemed to breathe with a quiet stillness, as though the mountain itself acknowledged her triumph. Yet, as she turned to leave, the weight of Borealis's words lingered in her mind. Its power is a burden as much as it is a gift. Eira retraced her steps through the labyrinthine passages of the dragon's lair. The light of the Aurora Core illuminated the way, casting shimmering reflections against the icy walls. The silence was profound, yet it felt alive, as if the mountain was watching her every move. She couldn't help but feel that this was not an ending, but the beginning of something far greater. The icy winds outside greeted her like an old adversary, but they no longer bit as sharply. The journey down the Frostspire was faster, the dangers she had faced seeming less insurmountable now that she carried the core. Yet, the jewel's presence was not without its challenges. It pulsed with a strange rhythm, and every time she glanced at its shimmering surface, faint images flickered within. A child running through a forest, a hand reaching out in desperation, and a flame that refused to extinguish despite the encroaching cold. Each image stirred something deep within her, as though the jewel was showing her fragments of lives not her own. Was this what Borealis meant by a burden? She wondered if the Aurora Core had connected her to a world far beyond her understanding, a web of stories and lives that now intertwined with hers. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. When Eira reached the base of the mountain, her village came into view. A collection of tiny rooftops peeking through a blanket of snow. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the faint sounds of life, laughter, the bark of a dog, the distant ring of a hammer, carried on the cold air. Yet, as she approached, the people who had once doubted her now stared in awe. "She's returned," someone whispered. "And with the jewel," another murmured. They gathered around her, their faces a mixture of curiosity, reverence, and fear. The Aurora Core's light reflected in their wide eyes, casting them in an ethereal glow. Eira felt the weight of their expectations settle on her shoulders. They had seen her leave as a wanderer, a dreamer chasing a legend, and now she returned carrying proof of her triumph. One elder stepped forward, his weathered face solemn. "You have done what none before you could, Eira," he said. "The Aurora Core is a gift of the mountain. What will you do with it?" Eira hesitated. The question had haunted her since she left Borealis's lair. The jewel's power was immense, but it was not hers to wield for selfish gain. She thought of the trials she had faced, the frozen lake, the shadow beast, the visions of her deepest fears. Each had taught her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to confront it. The jewel was not an answer to life's challenges, but a reflection of the strength within those who face them. "I will use it to protect," she said finally, her voice steady. "To guide, not to rule." The elder nodded, his expression softening. "Then you honor the mountain's gift." That night, the village gathered to celebrate, the small square aglow with firelight and laughter. Eira sat apart from the revelry, the Aurora Core resting in her lap. Its light seemed to pulse in harmony with the flickering flames, its glow warm and inviting. She traced its surface with her fingers, feeling the immense power within it, but also its restraint. Borealis's final words echoed in her mind. "Use it wisely." She realized that the jewel's true power was not in what it could do, but in what it represented. A reminder of her own journey, her growth, and the courage she had found within herself. It was a symbol of the bravery that lay dormant in all who dared to seek it. As the night deepened and the first snow of winter began to fall, Eira looked up at the stars, the Aurora Core's light shining softly in her hands. She knew that her story was far from over. The jewel's blessing was not an end but a beginning, a chance to forge a path not just for herself, but for those who would follow. Inspired by the tale of the wanderer who dared to face the mountain and found courage within. And somewhere, high in the Frostspire, Borealis watched, its crystalline eyes reflecting the lights of the aurora. It let out a low, rumbling sigh, its work complete, for now. The Aurora Core had found its bearer, and the legend of the Frost Dragon's jewel lived on.